Dear viewers, welcome to the latest episode in Manitowoc History Review. Before we begin the story of Elevator B, I would like to take time to remember Elmer Bleck, 1909 to 1996. Elmer was the young amateur photographer that took pictures of Elevator B for this story, as well as the photos of the 1952 Sioux Line warehouse fire and Miss Augusta Bleck's Thanksgiving Day turkey. Thanks, Elmer. Today we will be discussing the history of Elevator B and its destruction by fire on March 26, 1962. Elevator B was constructed in 1897 on the south side of the Manitowoc River by the Northern Grain Company. The structure was actually two buildings: the main building and an annex, which was constructed in 1899 at a cost of $72,000. Except for the basic foundation, both buildings were constructed completely of lumber. The smaller of the two structures stood 100 feet high, while the larger of the two stood 110 feet. Together they covered more than a city block and a half with a combined capacity of 1,300,000 bushels of grain. The main building had a concrete basement which, being next to the Manitowoc River, was always cool and was excellent for storage of vegetables such as peas and carrots. The basic idea of the grain elevator was quite simple. It was there to store grains such as wheat, barley, oats, and corn until needed. The grain was stored in 95 bins that reached from the building's foundation to the top, and each bin could be loaded and unloaded separately with a series of conveyor belts that ran on a steam boiler system located in a boiler room next to the main building. Most grain coming to the elevator was brought in by railroad car by the two railroads operating in Manitowoc at the time. The majority of the grain was then shipped out on large grain vessels to different locations in the United States, Canada, and ports around the world. Just before the winter freeze took place, it was not uncommon for grain vessels to come to Manitowoc completely loaded. They then unloaded their grain into the elevator for winter storage. Elevator B would have several owners during its life. Built by the Northern Grain Company in 1897, it was sold several years later to the Western Elevator Company and then to the Bartlett Ferrier Company, who ran the elevator until 1949, when it was sold to the Wisconsin Malting Company. For the men that worked at the elevator, their work schedule was sporadic, especially during the winter months when shipping on the Great Lakes came to a standstill. Work also depended on the growing season in the Midwest. If the grain growing season for 1 or more years was poor, little grain found its way to Manitowoc for storage or shipment. At times the elevator might stand empty for months or even a year or more. Other times, like in 1899, the Northern Grain Company couldn't keep up with business. A freight blockade took place on the Great Lakes, and railroad cars filled with grain filled the railroad yards of the Chicago and Northwestern and Wisconsin Central. The C&N.W. had 171 cars of grain and 1777 cars of flour waiting for transport. The Wisconsin Central had 400 cars in their yard with 600 more waiting in line. The Ann Arbor Line, the P&M, and Crosby Transportation Company in Manitowoc did their best to keep the cars moving, but the amount of grain moving through Manitowoc that year was overwhelming. At the beginning, smaller vessels such as the steamer Topeka was loaded with 70,000 bushels of corn, but within a few years, steamers like the Willinson was loaded with 300,000 bushels of oats and barley. Or the freighter A.M. Buyers took on 325,000 bushels of wheat consigned to the Pillsbury flour mills. Now we must understand that a bushel of wheat weighs approximately 56 pounds. That means that a vessel taking on 325,000 bushels of wheat is taking on a load of 18,200,000 pounds. This presented a problem, as over time the Manitowoc River filled in with silt from upriver, causing a problem with the larger freighters once they were loaded. During periods of low water, vessel after vessel would find itself grounded and would have to wait for 1 or 2 tugs to free them. This problem came to a head in 1938 when the government agreed to dredge the river at government expense. But, before they could begin, each landowner along the river had to agree to the dredging and sign a release. A Mrs. John Caddo, who owned a small plot of land along the river, refused to sign. This held up the dredging for months and forced Elevator B to discontinue operations until the matter was settled. The city offered to purchase her property, but Mrs. Caddo refused all offers. In the end, it appears the city was forced to condemn the property so that dredging could begin. During times when Elevator B was busy, the government had a customs collector assigned to Manitowoc. When vessels from Canada or other countries brought in shipments of grain, the government charged a duty of 20 cents a bushel on each shipment. This could amount to as much as $20,000 a shipment. Since Elevator B was constructed of wood, it was necessary to keep it in repair and looking respectable. About every 10 years the entire structure required a fresh coat of shiny black paint. This job had to be farmed out as no one in the Manitowoc area cared to take on this task. In 1923 the job was contracted to a company from Omaha, Nebraska. The company did not use scaffolding. Instead, the painter sat on a small seat, just room enough for himself and the paint, the seat being kept in place by the rope. As each painter wanted to go higher up the side of the building or down lower, he just pulled on the rope. We must remember that these men were working at 100 feet or more up the side of the building, and when the wind picked up they might bounce around like a rubber ball. The job of painting the main building and its annex would take weeks of steady work. During World War I and II, Elevator B was pretty much taken over by the government for storage of grain that was to be shipped to Europe before, during, and after the wars ended. It was also used by the government during the Great Depression years. Up until this time I have not mentioned Elevator B's sister Elevator A, as that structure is a story in itself. Elevator A was built between 1890 and 1895 by the Northern Grain Company and was quite a bit smaller than Elevator B, as it had a capacity of only 600,000 bushels. Elevator A was used only sparingly as it remained empty and unused for periods up to 5 years. Elevator A was also made of wood, and because it was empty most of the time was not kept up as well as Elevator B. The owners of Elevator A tried several times to sell the structure but could find no parties interested in the property. By 1948 it had become unusable and was very much a fire hazard. For this reason, the structure was sold to the Riverside Wrecking Company. The company went to work salvaging the thousands of feet of valuable lumber that made up the building and other equipment in the building. Before long the building was completely dismantled and became just a memory. Elevator B would continue to be used for grain storage and shipment for another 6 or 7 years when it ceased receiving grain. During that time, the structure came close to burning twice. The first incident occurred on October 28, 1952, when the Sioux Line warehouse across the river from Elevator B caught fire and burned to the ground. Sparks from that fire landed on different locations on Elevator B and required the Manitowoc Fire Department to spray a continuous flow of water from the Manitowoc River onto the elevator to stop it from burning. Then, just several weeks later, the barge Abyssinia, which was docked next to Elevator B, caught fire and again threatened the elevator. The structure, now empty, became a problem for its owners. While they tried to keep the building secured, it was being broken into time and again. Tramps would break in at night to find a place to sleep. During cold weather they would start small fire to keep warm. In addition, young boys would break in and were often escorted out by the police department. Fire Chief James Danielson sounded the alarm in 1960 that the structure in its present condition could be the cause of a major fire if something was not done. To make the city happy, Robert Michaels, plant manager of the Wisconsin Malting Company, announced in August 1960 that Elevator B would be raised as soon as a company could be found to do the job. A year and a half later the elevator was still standing proud and tall with no further action taken to bring it down. That was until 11:52 p.m. on the evening of March 25, 1962, when a fire at Elevator B was reported to the Manitowoc Fire Department. Within minutes, flames towered several hundred feet into the air and could be seen for miles. The fire department realized that the fire was way out of control and called for assistance from the Valders, Newton, Silver Creek, Town of Two Rivers, and Rockwood fire departments. In addition, the U.S. Coast Guard station in Two Rivers came with portable pumps to protect docks and other equipment along the river. Buildings near the elevator were evacuated of their occupants. Homeowners on both the south and north side of Manitowoc called the fire department to report embers from the fire landing on their rooftops and in their yards. As the fire increased in intensity, the roof of the elevator fell in raising dust which compressed burning gases. This in turn caused a massive explosion which blew the north wall of the elevator into the Manitowoc River. The explosion also sent sheet metal from the roof flying in all directions. A large section of the tin roof was found lodged in a tall tree in front of the vocational school on Clark Street, and another piece landed near the Miro Company plant of So. 15th Street and Washington Street. The fire burned out of control for nearly 3 hours before it began to die down. During that time, it was estimated that nearly 10,000 spectators lined the streets in the downtown area as the fire burned out of control. Because of the intense heat produced by the fire, firemen had to spray other firefighters with a constant flow of water to keep their clothes from burning. The intense heat also melted telephone lines in the area, and at one time the phone at the police station, fire department, county traffic, and Holy Family Hospital were all out of order. Railroad cars in the area were badly scorched, as well as Engine 5, ladder truck, and pumper of the Manitowoc Fire Department. Many of the fire hoses were later found with large holes burned through them, with leaks found in many places. Windows in the homes of residences were blown out by the intense heat. To give those fighting the fire a break, the Salvation Army and Manitowoc Red Cross served over 500 cups of coffee. At last, the fire burned itself out, and afterwards it was estimated that 1,200,000 gallons of water were sprayed on the elevator and surrounding structures during the fire. As is normal with fires of this type, the next day fires sprang up in different areas of the rubble that remained. The fire department remained on the scene until no more fires could be detected. In the end, no cause of the fire was ever determined. The only part of the building that remained standing was a concrete shaft. Hammond Construction Company of Manitowoc was called in to raise that structure as it was considered unsafe. It would take months before the area where Elevator B once sat to be completely cleared. Today, one of Red Arrow Products' manufacturing plants sits on the spot where Elevator B once proudly sat and did business for 65 years. Thank you for joining me in this latest episode of Manitowoc History Review. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe.